Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and I'm here today to talk to you about Season 2, Episode 2, Love Gods. Love Gods is a very good episode. It's a very good episode from its writing standpoint, and because of the what if. The whole what if aspect of it what truly makes it great because it makes you think on so many levels. Could this really happen? If it were to happen, how bad would it be? Well, it's gonna suck. So what exactly is Love Gods? By the title, you really can't really get no grasp of what it means. And that's the great thing about it. So it leaves you in mystery and awe. Basically, what it is that in this episode, the male population is pretty much over with. See, Iraq went to war, I believe, with America in this universe, and they created germ warfare, biological weapons of mass destruction, and basically, this is why you should never create bio warfare and everything, because of the simple fact that it was targeted to wipe out the Y chromosome, which of course only appears in men. And so I think the bomb got detonated in Iraq, like it backfired, and then now Iraq's like a huge crater. But of course, being a virus, it spread throughout the world, killing the population of men. So the women decided, okay, let's round up all the men who are like immune to this and put them in breeder camps. And now Australia is a supercontinent because they were so far from the blast radius and everything that, like, like it must have been like a huge explosion. So it spread. The shock waves went like everywhere, and the germs went everywhere. And so they said Australia was so far away from it that many of the men there survived, and it's now a supercontinent, which Australia is very close to New Zealand. So they didn't mention New Zealand at all. But New Zealand's a whole lot smaller than Australia. And so, but back in the 90s, nobody really knew what New Zealand was because nobody really, knew that a lot of like American shows, syndicated shows, were filmed in New Zealand. Xena, Hercules, High Tide, Power Rangers, a couple of the Matrix movies were made over there. Chronicles of Narnia, you name it. You know what I'm saying? Oh, The Wilds, that was filmed over there recently and stuff. And so, yeah. And so, like, it really makes you think, you know what I'm saying? Like, what would happen if a virus took out men and there's only a couple of men left? And the reason why I decided to talk about this episode, as random as it is, not only because it's a good episode and everything, but also because I just got through watching a show called Creamery. Creamery is a show on Hulu. You can watch it now. The first 2 seasons are up, and the second season just came out last week. And it's a show set in New Zealand because it's made in New Zealand, and it's made by 4 Kiwi women that I've seen some of this stuff before on a web series they have. And so the show is a dark comedy, and it revolves around, of course, a virus getting out, killing the male population. They discover some men are still alive, and it's a whole lot of shenanigans and stuff. It's a pretty good show, but you have to get used to their style of comedy because it's a bit different than, of course, over here. But I like it. The comedy adds a whimsical approach to it, so it won't be too straightforward like Y the Last Man. I think Y the Last Man came out on FX, I think. I didn't like Y the Last Man. I couldn't even finish Y the Last Man. I got by episode 2 and I'm like, I'm done. It was just too dry for me. And I really wanted to watch it because this concept, like I said before, is very, very interesting. But like I said before, I wanted to also bring up this episode because, in my opinion, I truly feel like this Sliders episode was the blueprint of this plot. See, before this episode, I've never ever heard of any show, a book, or whatever dealing with the virus taking out the male population and only leaving women left. And it wasn't until I heard it. This came out in the 90s. I was probably about like a preteen teenager when this show came out. And, before then, all I would watch would be like comedies, sitcoms, superhero cartoons, comedy cartoons, and your various action type stuff. I wasn't never really into sci-fi, except for Star Trek. And of course, this one, but I don't really consider this too much sci-fi. But Star Trek was my sci-fi jam. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never heard of this plot in any other type of show prior to Sliders. Now, since Sliders happened, and since this happened in the 90s, there has been a plethora of different stories told of viruses taking out men and only having women left. I've already mentioned Creamery. There's Why the Last Man, which is based off, I think, a novel and stuff. And there are several other television shows very similar, and movies very similar, to where a virus take out men, there's women left, and there's a few men left in the world. But it all came out around the 2000s, and this Slider episode came out in the 90s. So then I'm like, okay, maybe there's like a book or something like that. So I Googled it and everything. And there are books where this has happened, but the only ones I can find came out in the 2000s. So if, in fact, that they were original enough to come up with this concept, boy, they was cooking in that kitchen. And so, but like I said before, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was a book or novel or a television show or something like that prior to this. I just can't find it online. So if you know about it, hey, hit me up and stuff. But like, I love shows that make you think. Like, I really do. And this show really always makes you think. And this show was ahead of its time, my God. Like, it almost predicted so many things that have happened in this show. And, good Sliders episodes, in my opinion, are the ones where it has a compelling narrative. The plot has to make some type of sense. It has to be different enough because it's on a parallel universe. And it has to make you think. Now, this show, like I said before, the whole virus, men taking out women, populating the world, they took a very different approach than most modern day shows you will see with this approach. And like, say, Creamery, you really get the feeling a woman really wants to have a child. They're desperate for it. They lost their baby in their womb. They lost their husbands, their brothers, you name it. Here, you really don't kind of get that feeling. It's just the baseline of it. Very similar to like that one sickness episode in season 1 where, a virus took out people, everybody, well, not everybody, but like male and female, that's what I mean. And, somebody pointed out that nobody was wearing masks, they weren't staying 6 feet apart, nothing like that. So it takes the more dramatic baseline approach to things. In this episode, it really takes a unique, different turn to the way, they tried to repopulate the world. They took the old-fashioned approach to it as opposed to the scientific route to it and stuff, which the professor did bring up in this episode, and I'm glad he did. And, I like that rawness to it because this is a parallel world and they are primitive in the way they approach repopulation because they could, like the professor said, he could have repopulated the earth within a matter of weeks or months or whatever, as opposed to what they're doing and everything. And the way they do it is nothing shy of sexual assault. They're forcing these men to repopulate the world whether they want to or not. And like I said before, they're doing it the old-fashioned way. Now, one thing I have to admit in this episode, is some of the terminology they use in here. Like, yeah, like I couldn't believe they got past the censors using the C word to explain the male anatomy down there. I'm just kind of like, how did that pass the censors back then? And then all of the semen, like innuendos, oh, nasty, man. And it's just like, how did it pass the censors? Nowadays, you kind of won't hear that on TV unless it's probably a streaming show, or most likely it's a show from another country, especially that in Europe. But in Europe, they have no filter on their mouths. They say anything and everything and stuff. So a show like Harlots on Hulu, you hear all kind of like sexual terms and stuff, and all kind of vulgar language and everything, as opposed to over here. But then again, we're starting to get that way in a lot of our television shows. I'm still shocked and surprised. Like only a few years ago, I was watching TV shows. Like, what was I was watching something on sci-fi, because I had just started doing like the streaming apps and I wanted to see what the networks had. And I was watching something I think called The Magicians, and I was watching something called Van Helsing. And I was surprised they cussed in that show using the S word. I'm like, what? They can't say that on TV, but apparently now they can on certain types of shows and certain type of networks and stuff. But before I'm going like completely off track, this show has some pretty good one-liners, and this episode has some good one-liner jokes. The professor, my God, the professor. You always, it's either the professor or Rembrandt, man. Always good for a laugh and stuff by some of the stuff they say. And, going to the whole what if approach, it makes you do wonder, what if a virus took out the population of man and you're left to repopulate the world, or you're the last man standing? Growing up, I thought that would have been the coolest thing, the last man on earth. Tons of women to have. But that's the mindset I was thinking of, that of a horny teenager. Now that I'm a crusty old man and everything, and I look the way to see the world is, and I think about the episode, The Weaker Sex, it would not be so much fun. Because think about it like this. One, let's say all the men are gone and you're the only one left. It's gonna be a new world order, and the NWO. It might not even start for the world. It may gonna be women and stuff, because women are gonna be the higher food chain in the world, and the only rights you're probably gonna have is something that from how a woman would have rights from the beginning of time to the 1970s. Basically, almost nothing. You'll be stuck either relegated to the kitchen or not being able to work, nothing like that, because women are gonna take over and stuff, and it's flipping the script just like in The Weaker Sex. And that, because that's another thing I like about this episode, it's kind of similar to The Weaker Sex but completely different. In that episode, we saw women use men, we see them treat them like a piece of meat. We see them getting jobs only because they look good. And so they reverse the roles in a very smart kind of way. And like I said before, that episode made me really think. Like a lot of people say, if like women were in charge of the world, it'll be so much better. And like I said, yeah. First 5-10 years, sure. Once you get in about like 20 years, 30, 50, up to 100, they're gonna flip it. The women are gonna turn into the men, and the men are gonna turn into the women. And the women are gonna rule with that of an iron. I was gonna say something else, but I probably can't say that word. They will rule with the iron tampon. I'll say it like that. As opposed to using bodily terms and stuff. Then they ain't gonna give up the power either and stuff. And so it would not be fun to be the only man left in a world full of women, because you will have some women that will flock to you and want to get with you, and they will get with you whether you want to or not. And we all know what's going to happen with that. Then you're going to have the other type of women that are going to be like, well, you know what? we went this long without men, and we don't need you and everything. That's what toys in the hand is for. And other women gonna be all like, you know what? I had some bad experiences with men. I just don't like men. You might not even survive a day because they might take you behind out or imprison you or something. And then, of course, let's not forget about the lesbians. They ain't gonna want you behind. So if any man thinks out there that like being the last man on earth is going to be great because you're going to have a buffet of women, just think those women might not even want you and everything. Because when certain decades started passing, a lot of women who were just about as straight gonna be are gonna turn to the other side because they're gonna want somebody to be with. That is something the Creamery show did. It's set more in the modern day. Creamery, a lot of the population of women, because it's set in the modern day. So of course there's like LGBT everywhere, but in that show there's more LGBT people because they've been without men for 8 years, and some of them had to go the other way, whether they wanted to or not. And then, of course, let's forget about the transgender men that's in that show. But in this television show set in the 90s, there are no lesbians, there are no transgender men. And so, they could not put that on 90s television and stuff. And even if they could, they probably wouldn't. And so this show just had like the baseline stream of it. So think of it as like the early approach, but in the modern day shows like Creamery and Why the Last Man, it's more of a realistic approach and stuff like that. Another reason why it would suck to be the last man on earth or the last group of men is because think about it. How in the world would you repopulate the world? I mean, if you had a group of men, and say a small group, like 5, something like that, 5, 10, or one person, it would be very impossible to try to repopulate the world because I think of cheetahs and everything. And I know what you're saying. Why in the world are you thinking about cheetahs when it comes to repopulating men? Well, there's a reason for that. There used to be a show I used to watch in the 90s called Creatures on PBS. It was a wildlife type show. Very fun and entertaining. And they said that back in the 90s, cheetahs were on the endangered species list. Why? Multiple reasons why. 1, because bigger animals are taking them out like lions. 2, because there's a lack of food because the bigger animals are getting it. 3, humans poaching, hunting, taking their land, building crap. And so because of that, it resulted in cheetahs like dying out. And now when cheetahs repopulate, sadly, they're incest. They're doing it with their cousins. That causes their gene pool to be significantly weaker and have deformities and stuff. And it causes them to get greater diseases a whole lot faster. So now they have to be put on like the wildlife preserve and stuff like that. But I think they're doing better now. And so because there are so few cheetahs, they had to literally do it with their cousins. They ain't know no better. You know what I'm saying? And because they're animals and stuff. And that's what would happen if you had one man left on the world, or just like say 5, because you got to think about it. Say there's one person left and they want to repopulate the world. Well, when you bang a couple of women and they come out with kids, and say the male kids survive, who are they gonna do it with? When they grow up, they can't do it with the other people their age because they're gonna be brothers and sisters and stuff. And they could do it with the older people, but what are the chances they might be able to have a baby or something like that? You know what I'm saying? And let's just say all the sperm banks are gone, so none of that. Like this literally is just like in my mind, the reality I made up. There's no sperm banks. There are no donor eggs. There's just like old-fashioned the way this show is. And if you're just one person, then you're gonna your kids. They can't do it with their brothers and sisters because they would be one that's incest, and 2, they would have like probably deformities at some point in a weaker gene pool, just like that the cheetahs. Now say there's like 5 people or 10 or something like that. maybe, but you were still running that scenario at some point in time. You know what I'm saying? Unless, of course, like I said, they just do like an older person and then they have a kid, and then you could probably repopulate like that. But it would be a whole lot better if you had more men, like maybe 150 to 100 and stuff, and spread them out around the world. And so that's something I've always wondered after watching this show is how you always hear that. Like you always hear that in like comedy shows. Oh, you know what? If we're the last two people on Earth, we're gonna have to repopulate. How? When you're gonna be related to the people you're repopulating, and you gonna how you gonna like you know what I'm saying? And so yeah. And so this episode just makes you think and everything. Now, the reason why I said forget about sperm banks and donor eggs and all of that is because on this world is so primitive and the medical science, they don't do donor eggs. They don't do the in virtual what was that called? I can't think of it. Like I'm getting tongue tied as I'm thinking about it. I'm getting F and V's in my tongue and I just can't think of it. Invertal fetal something like that. Like they have not come up with that process yet. Though like they literally do it the old fashioned way. They make men have sex with women, 5 to 7 women a day. That's how they repopulate the earth on this on the population of people on this planet. And so far the virus isn't creating no male offspring and stuff. It's only creating females. And so like because the virus will take out the male and everything. And like the professor said, he could have repopulated the earth if, they would have had better modern science. But then this earth is so primitive. And like I said before, that's why I like about this episode, unlike the modern day stuff, because, it's a parallel world. So how is it different from ours? Well, the medical science suck and everything. And so they just haven't, it's just like that sickness episode. They didn't have medicine. They didn't even have penicillin and everything. So that's one thing about sliders always like. I like that primitive approach to it and where the sliders have to help teach the people this. However, the sad thing is the sliders actually don't teach nobody nothing in this episode. They don't teach people about donor eggs and sperm banks and like all this other stuff. And, they don't do that, which is quite a shame. But I do like the suspense in this episode. Like you really are worried for the sliders. So basically, they slide onto the earth. And one thing they notice, before I go any further, let me just say I love all the locations in this episode. We get a whole bunch of brand new locations and so many of them are beautiful. Even the interiors of like, the breeding facilities and stuff. The waiting room, it looks nice. That one woman who wanted to do it with like Quinn, where she lived at was amazing looking. The mountains, the trees, the rivers, like that just, who wouldn't want to live there unless, a stranger comes a knocking or like a wild animal or something like that. But who wouldn't want to live there, And so, they're on Earth. And the thing that catches a person's intrigue is the first couple of minutes. When they're looking around the world, they notice that there are tons of women and no men. And so the men realize they could be on a world with no men. Then they go to the clothing store and they see it's nothing but women's stuff. Wade points out something that is very interesting. She said there are no guns or weapons of war of any kind in the toy store. Like normally you see in the toy store, you'll see knives, grenades, guns, like all kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? That's bows and arrows. That's what I used to see a lot growing up when I was a kid. And there are none of that. And there's just a bunch of dolls. And, the professor literally said you can learn a lot by where you're at from what kind of toys it entertains its kids with. And that's something I've always kept in the back of my mind. And it's a really good teaching lesson and a good observation. Like you go someplace like a new city or state, town, whatever, and whatever you see around town, most likely, that's what people are into and stuff. And a little girl comes out the store with kind of like, I don't know what kind of doll exactly. It's kind of like it looks kind of like a one of those I Love Buddy type dolls. Remember those? I had one of those. And I remember I ripped his clothes off. I got a pink marker because I was huge into wrestling and Bret the Hitman Hart. And I just like painted Bret the Hitman's Hart outfit on him. And I pretend like my buddy doll was Bret the Hitman Hart and stuff. And so like the little girl comes out with like a little boy doll and everything, and she's very shocked to see the men, and that right there triggers you right there to think, what kind of world is this? There are no boy toys, and there's a girl playing with a boy doll. And Rembrandt literally says that Johnny Cage is having a tea party and everything, so it really makes you wonder. And then they get mobbed by like a tons of women. They get separated. We see the guys in like a breeding facility, but we don't know that quite yet. And one of the things that I've noticed, two things about this episode that I never noticed before. One, this is an episode where Quinn has a little bit of facial hair stubble, and two, he is naked on the table. I'm not joking. Like, okay, when he's in that room and he has to cough and the woman's like, put back your clothes on, and you see him putting back his clothes. My eyes always went from him coughing to that woman, and then I always followed that woman. But something told me follow Jerry because he was acting kind of weird. And yeah, he is completely butt naked on that table and his hands is covering his junk. And then you see him pulling on his shorts. Not shorts, but boxers. I have never noticed that before. And I'm surprised they did that and everything. But knowing Jerry, he probably loved it. If you know anything about Jerry O'Connell and stuff. And, quickly we do find out what's going on in this world. Like, there are tons of men in this facility. And like the guys, it's funny because Professor and Rembrandt, they're loving this world because they don't know what it's about yet. And Quinn is the only one who's kind of worried. And the guys are excited, but Quinn lets them know, yo man, they handcuffed us and everything. And then, when they're talking to that woman, they're all like, we're willing and ready to whatever. And then they find out kind of what's going on. And Quinn is just kind of like, yo, man, I ain't for this crap. Like, tell us what's going on and stuff. And I love how Quinn is just kind of like, he slid so many times where he just kind of like, this is too good to be true and everything. Whereas the other two dudes are just being like horny and everything. And then, of course, we do find out when we see them in like the gym. And like the professor, the man talking about like he just had a disgusting like protein drink shoved down his throat by an Amazon. And it completely squashed all the fantasies he's had about that. Oh Lord have mercy. And so like we see like the poster of like the breeders of the month and stuff like that, and we see Trevor Grant, who's like an Australian. He's like pissing off this one other guy and everything. All the fake Australian accents in here are terrible, man. They're terrible. But anyways, like they realize that they are in a breeding camp and they have to bang 5 to 7 women a day, a week, and everything. And now the guys are kind of like, oh, this isn't a good idea, and they don't want to be there no more. But the problem is they got slide in about 2.5 days and stuff, and Wade is nowhere to be found. So they talk to a guy in the sauna named David, and he lets them know, what's going on a little bit, and that he needs some extra muscle to help him escape because his sister and wife are going to help him escape, and he just has to give the signal. So we see the dudes, they're scurrying and everything. They're trying to make it over the wall. And like, his sister is like the distraction. And so they get over the wall, but then sadly, Rembrandt is almost about to be left behind. They quickly get in his wife's car and they scurry off. And so Wade this whole time, she's been at the Dominion waiting for the guys to show up. She is the only one with the timer. We actually don't see that much of Wade in this episode. Thankfully, she is not the damsel in distress, but we still don't get to see that much of her. This mostly just revolves around the guys. And so, like, we get to see some cool info commercials of women growing their own men as a form of a cheetah pet. Remember those things? Do they even still make those things? And so, like, they talk to Diane, who is his wife, as they're hiding out in their place. And she tells them, like, why, like, she was rejected. Basically, to start the new world order type thing, they want perfect people. They want young women, pretty women, educated women, and healthy women. They pump these men full of, like, hormones and, like, all kind of crap. And, to get their sperm up and stuff like that. And so, like, because she's too old in their eyes to make a baby, they don't want her. And she doesn't look that old. She gotta be somewhere in her 30s and stuff. And so they're not like kidding around and stuff. And, we finally now get to hear some turmoil of emotion from people, desperately wanting to be with their husbands, having them ripped apart from them, put in those breeder camps, and can't be with their husband. And, that's like really sad and stuff. I wish we could have got a bit more, but we do get more of that towards this other character in the show. And so they just left her sister be in custody. We don't see the sister no more. And when they leave that planet, they literally left their sister in custody. So it's kind of like, dude, she's going to get it and everything when she's in prison because she helped all these men escape and everything. So, the cops and everything, they're desperately looking for the men. And so, like, they have to get a message out to Wade. Luckily, they do, but some police officers and stuff overhear her, and they follow her to that lady's place. And so while they're there, they don't get to stay there too long because the cops are on their trail. They hide out. But sadly, Diane's about to be taken into custody, which causes David to want to rescue her. But he's gonna expose her and the rest of everybody else if he comes out. They almost made it to safety until somebody left the toilet seat up. Ah, man. And so they have to like escape through like the roof, and then they make it on foot. Everything's looking good until a van shows up, and it tranquilizes that of the professor and that of Quinn. Quinn is able to hold the tranquilizer dart a lot longer than the professor is. Boy, the professor took out a stick and he was about to whack those women. And so everybody made it out of there safe, except for the professor. He's now been taken, but he's not taken by the Americans. He's taken by the Australians. And David nobody knows where the professor and Quinn are at. So they assume, the professor, when David tells him, probably the Aussies have him and everything, and then they shoot to kill because, it's kind of like, why would they shoot a man and they need them to repopulate the world? So that's just kind of dumb on their part. But since they got more men than the Americans, I guess they don't care, you know what I'm saying? And so like... And it's there we see a guard, when they're there with the professor. She starts taking her clothes off and she locks the door. And the professor's like, Lord have mercy, or something like that. Or good Lord, he says, something like that. And, he does not want to do anything with her. Now, the question is, what happened between those two? Because it's never shown between her and the professor. And since she locked the door and she has a weapon, it makes you wonder what happened in that room because he did not want to do anything, And so, like, also another thing, Vegemite, which is something they have in Australia. It's like this yeasty jam type stuff. I've had that before. I did not like it. Somebody from actual Australia actually sent it to me when I was in college. I used to talk to her online. And I licked that stuff and it just was disgusting. I spit that crap out. But she told me I was supposed to eat it with toast. She didn't tell me that before I threw it away. So ugh, that stuff is disgusting. I don't know how they can eat it, but they do. And so Wade has an idea of how to bust Quinn and the professor out. So she dresses Rembrandt in drag. And he looks hideous. Oh my God. The shoes, the dress, the everything. And he tells her he ain't shaving his mustache off because he's had it ever since high school. But he shaved it off for season 4 and 5 and everything. And so he's having a hard time walking like a woman. Stuff. It's one of the most hilarious things you ever seen. They want David to come, but he's working with his lawyer to get Diane out so they can go to Mexico because there is no forced breeding over there. Canada has forced breeding, and they assume that's where Quinn and the others came from and stuff. And so we actually finally get to see what happened to Quinn. He woke up 10 hours later and he's with a woman, an older lady. Very beautiful older lady too. And this is the part that always weirded me out because I was always thinking, wait, was she in another Sliders episode because of the way she's talking to him? But no, see, basically she used to run this kind of like a cookie type place with her husband, but he died of the virus. And this is where we get to hear some emotional tug strings, but not as powerful as I would like to have heard it. Basically, she lost her husband to the virus. They don't have a kid. She's well into her 40s, probably early 50s. And she wants a kid in her life. She's tired of being lonely. And she tells Quinn, I can accept not having a man in my life, but she wants a kid in her life. And she wants to make one with Quinn and everything. And he doesn't want to. He said, he doesn't want to take advantage of her. And he doesn't want to have a kid he can't raise and stuff. But she is desperate to have this kid. But of course, he has to slide on out of there and stuff. Now, when they show up at the Australian, is it an embassy or no, consul, I think. They realize something. Only the professor is there and they don't know where Quinn is at. And so they might have to slide without them. Wade, I really like when they do have her, and finally in this episode, she's being smart. She realizes that, what? Quinn knows to meet them at a certain location. They have to get to that location. They ain't gonna let Rembrandt go and they ain't gonna let the professor go. So she makes a deal with the Australians and everything after trying to defect her and Rembrandt over there. She decides, what? She can get them Trevor Grant back, but the Americans have to release Diane. And so she contacts David and everything. Now, at this point in time, David and Diane know nothing about sliding. So, when the Australians and the American officers and stuff, they meet up under the bridge, we see Diane and David, and we see Rembrandt, and we see the professor. Somebody gave Rembrandt some male clothes and stuff, and thank God. And so, they don't know where Wade is at. They know they only got 6 minutes to slide. And so Professor and Rembrandt are very worried. And so all of a sudden, they're supposed to be loaded into a van. And David gives Diane a signal. So what was going on? So he puts her in the van because she wasn't supposed to go in there. Because they were supposed to go back to the breeding camp in America. And so that was the exchange. To get the 4 Americans for Trevor Grant. But of course Quinn's not there yet. And well, not 4 Americans, but the 4 men. And so they're all in the van and Wade's driving the van. And Wade, boy, she's hauling butt. And we get a really cool sliding scene, a really cool escape scene. They're hauling butt in the van. They activate the tunnel. And the van goes into like the tunnel, taking David and taking Diane with them to this new world. And then we see Quinn come on out and he jumps into like the portal. And I don't know, the statue he was hiding behind. They filmed in Canada. What the heck kind of statue was this? At first it looked like Abraham Lincoln, but then it kind of didn't. And so they all got away. The cops are very shocked and surprised to see the whole sliding stuff. And once again, they left his sister in police custody. They didn't even release her. But then the ending is the thing that always boggled me. And I've stated this before. We see that woman who had who wanted to make a baby with Quinn. She took a Polaroid picture of him, and it's next to like her bed and everything, and she's just treasuring Quinn's picture. So then it makes you now wonder, did Quinn do her and give her a baby or not? Because of the way it ended, it makes it seem like either he did, or maybe she just enjoyed being in the presence of a man because she hasn't been with one in a long time. Just the thought, just like being like next to one, you know what I'm saying? And it does make you wonder really, really hard what happened between those two off screen and everything. So like I said before, this is a really good episode. There's lots of high stakes. There's good writing. It makes you think and everything. And it makes you thankful that there is no virus that took out men. And this is why germ warfare is like very terrible. Like the Black Death in Europe. It was man-made and it killed a lot of people. It's supposed to be gone. Technically it is because it was eradicated, but I watched Inside Edition a couple of years back and a man was outside barefooted. His cat came into the yard, came out from the woods. It had a mouse in its mouth. It dropped the mouse or rat and it bit him on the toe. His toes, two of them turned black. He had to have them amputated off. Turns out it was the remnants of the Black Death. Somehow it survived all these centuries. And now he has to learn how to re-walk and everything. True story and everything. So it's like, you know, viruses are, whether they're natural or man-made, they don't always leave this earth and everything, you know.